welcome to the special seminar on economic value chain analysis for national development strategies by Dr. Sean. So, in this particular seminar, we have a program schedule where first we will have welcome remarks by our moderator, Achan Orawa Chonlasin, Executive Director of AIT Extension. Then we will have introduction of speaker by Dr. M.D. Zakir Hussain, sir, Course Director, AIT Extension. Then we will have the main presentation by Dr. Sean. Then finally, we will end this presentation with a few questions and interactive discussions. So first, I welcome Mr. Orawa Chonlasin, sir, Executive Director of AIT Extension, to provide the welcome remarks. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Kona, for these introductions to these very special sessions. Organized by AIT Extension and also the entrepreneurship centers of AIT. This session is very special because of Dr. Sean himself, has been in this, business of the economic value chain for many years. And also he has been working in so many areas and so many organizations, as well as so many projects with the donor agency and ADB, including his own experience in universities and also being the senior applied research and also the consultant to ADB, AIT Extensions, with my team, Dr. Zakir Hussain, and my team here in AIT, felt that this is going to be very important and very useful to the entire AIT researchers and students and also faculty members and also our friends of AIT to explore the tools, economics tools, so to speak, or the holistic tool that can be, applied in different levels. From our own experience working with Sean, actually the tools that John is going to present is giving you the space to really explore further, and this can be also applied in so many areas, and not only the areas that Sean himself has the experience and specialties. So thank you very much, Sean, to giving AIT these opportunities. I know this is first time for you to visit AIT. We are very pleased, very glad to have personal interaction with you, to also our participant online. And we are hoping that we will also be close with you and also interact with you more in the future, so that we can learn from you and also we can learn from your experience, and we can also create networks of the researchers. So thank you, Dr. Zakir and his team, to organize and make this event possible, because I've been telling Sean that, we should bring Sean to AIT once and, be able to have Sean to share his experience. So thank you very much for doing that. So thank you, participants, to giving your time for this online session. I wish you all the best and also enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Orawa Chonlasin. Dear everyone, my name is M.D. Zakir Hussain. I will introduce our speaker today. So the speaker today is Dr. Sean Wellborn Wood, an Australian citizen and national, currently based in Southeast Asia. Dr. Sean is currently holding the Senior Applied Research Specialist and Consultant position at the Asian Development Bank. He is also the CEO of Saksara, an Indonesian-based research institute focusing on human, social, economic development throughout Asia, doing mostly the research project and development project. Dr. Sean has had a longer career in academia, and previously he has served as an Associate Dean International in the Faculty of Science at the University of Western Australia, where he was also the Director of International Science for Future Festival, working alongside with the Nobel laureate Professor Barry Marshall and other exceptional scientists there. He was basically promoting science to students throughout Southeast Asia with that job. He had also recently held a position called Dean ASEAN, which is Association of Southeast Asian Nations, at the Curtin University in Australia, and has been now permanently based and living in Southeast Asia, primarily in Indonesia, I came to know, for last 20 years. Dr. Sean is predominantly working on national development strategies that you have just heard, also from Achan Orawa Chonlasin. national development strategies through economic value chain analysis across diverse industry sector, including sustainable energy solutions, energy storage, agricultural technologies, and semiconductors. He is concurrently working on the strengthening of higher education sector through economic and social value chain analysis of those institutions. The development of research, development and innovation of ecosystems, also some of the work that he's actually conducting and carrying out. I just had a little chat with Dr. Sean and came to know that the ongoing project that he has been now engaged with through ADB and also through his research agency. Currently, I think Dr. Sean is working in India, in Indonesia, in Bangladesh and Thailand. So we are really looking forward to learn from those experiences. And definitely the main topic today is economic value chain analysis for national development strategies and how it is probably relevant as an academic institute for AIT. So we are looking forward to that. I think today's moderator, I think I don't need to introduce Mr. Voravech Chonlasin, who is the Executive Director of AIT Extension. He will be the main moderator for these sessions. For those of you attending here in person, definitely you will have the option to ask questions at the end of the session. The session is probably going to be for an hour. And then after that, you will have the opportunity to ask the questions. For those who are joining online, please remember that there is this Q&A box and also the comment sections. You can feel free to put your comments and questions there. And we have our colleagues to pick those questions and bring to the moderators and to this discussion as well. So with that, thank you very much once again to everyone joining this program in person and online. So we are now going to present Dr. Sean and requesting him to start his session. Dr. Sean, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me here. It's really a pleasure to be here. I was talking to Joe as we're walking along the promenade and to the building here, saying that when I was a young student, I wish I had known that AIT existed, something like this. I think it's an excellent idea. So I'm very happy to be here. The idea that an institution like this exists that's focused on issues that are relevant to Asia with a community of students from around Asia is a wonderful idea. And as you mentioned before, you know, I've held the position of Dean ASEAN at Curtin University for 3 years before joining ADB full-time. And certainly Australia is one of those countries that increasingly since Paul Keating's government has been looking at itself increasingly as a part of Asia. You know, we are in that, particularly where I come from in the west coast of Australia, we're closer, my hometown is closer to Indonesia than it is to Sydney or Melbourne. We certainly see ourselves in that time zone as well. A third of the world's population is in the time zone of my hometown in Perth, including the majority of Asia, plus or minus an hour in that space. So I'm very happy to be here. Today, we are talking about economic value chain analysis and the work that I'm doing in India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Philippines, Indonesia, all around sort of Southeast and South Asia, and soon to be into Central Asia as well a little bit. So I'm happy to do that. But before we start, I think that there are some core concepts that we should go through today. To frame this, it'll just take a few minutes. Now, I apologize, when you come and speak at an institution, you don't really have an idea who the audience is going to be so much. So if these concepts are thoroughly, well and truly known to all of you, please forgive me for not knowing how to pitch this appropriately. But let's talk about some of them because they do frame a lot of what we're doing today. And these are the idea of development is is not a universally coherent idea for many people. So we're going to talk about some key concepts that will guide this conversation. First of all, I'm assuming that we all know what capitalism is. You know, the idea that an economic and social system like capitalism means the production that is land, factories, capital, technology are privately owned and operated for profit. This is an idea of many of the countries that we work in, not all of them, but even those who don't have necessarily a democratic form of government still operate under kind of these ideas. Late capitalism is an idea. When I was an undergraduate student back in the 1980s, seems like 1,000 years ago now, I attended a lecture by a philosopher named Frederick Jameson, who many of you may have heard of, who was one of the first to popularize the use of this term, late capitalism. And it's characterized by multinational corporations, by mass consumerism and the financialization of economies. Also, it often refers to the paradoxes or absurdities of highly developed capitalism, extreme wealth inequality, hyper-consumerism, corporate dominance over politics and culture, the kinds of things that we're seeing around the world today that are quite fractious. And it's also tied to this idea of postmodern culture that Jameson coined, where everything becomes a product, a cultural life is saturated with marketing, branding, and spectacle. It's a term that he called the Coca-Colaization of culture. Where even our social interactions now with each other via social media are commercialized in some ways. Views, hits, likes, subscribes, the kinds of things that we become familiar with over time. This will become a little bit clearer as we move through the presentation today, why some of these core concepts become relevant. Let's talk about development as well, because this is the reason why ADB exists and the reason why we do a lot of this work is this notion of development. This is very much still amongst philosophers and theorists and others, a contested political idea, the idea of development. But essentially, it refers to progress or growth or advancement from a lesser state to a greater state. I think that's what we commonly refer to as development. It's often framed as the process by which a nation improves its economic, social, political, and human conditions, sometimes at the expense of other ideas. And it's become institutionalized in global discourse, firstly with the founding of the UN. And for those of you who know the Bretton Woods conference that took place following World War II in 1944 in New Hampshire in the United States, yes. Late capitalism and development, we're up to development, so it's only this little bit into it. That development, this idea that emerged after World War II, and there were a number of institutions, the IMF and the World Bank. This was led by the Bretton Woods events were led by Keynes, you know, the economist, where we get the term Keynesian economics. It was led by John Maynard Keynes, sorry, in 1944, just a couple of years before he died, in fact. And this was instrumental at the time in terms of finding a way to ensure that the precursors to World War II wouldn't occur again, right? That there was some kind of interventions that were put in place to provide some stability to countries that were in some sort of crisis at the time. If we look at the idea of development and those who, you know, the various political ideologies that sort of govern the world at the moment, if we try to tease out what are some of the common development outcomes that both political sides of the spectrum and those in between tend to agree on, we have this core set of ideas. I must point out that these core ideas are quite often under threat, as they are today as well. The idea that human well-being and capabilities as well. And these ideas refer to things like our health and our well-being and our capabilities, access to education and skills training and development and the kinds of things that help us to sustain our lives. That the personal freedom and social inclusion, our ability to have some determination over the system of government that we have and the way that we can live our lives, economic opportunity and resilience, environmental and planetary sustainability, an idea that a couple of years ago, I thought we were moving towards a consensus that we would all agree on this idea. It seems like we've taken a couple of steps backwards in this agenda. And of course, governance and collective agency, that we have good governance and we have the ability, whether that's through communities or through other political structures, to be able to determine how we can solve society and community problems. These are the kind of bigger ideas that we seem to have some consensus on. And these ideas are the sorts of things that frame what it is that we do. I'll briefly talk about, I'm going to talk about a number of contexts for the way that we talk about economic value chain analysis. But I think it's always useful to pick out a kind of contexts that we focus on a little bit throughout these discussions. And I've chosen agriculture for a number of reasons. One, it's the project we're working on the most in Thailand at the moment, so it's got some contextual relevance. But it's also rich with the bigger ideas of technology and semiconductors and skills training and development, a range of other ideas as well. And it's also aligned with a lot of the work that AIT is doing in projects and a range of other things. So if you go back about 12,000 years ago, the Neolithic period of human civilization, we moved towards, from hunter-gatherers to an agricultural or elements of agricultural transition, which gave us sort of a bit of a surplus of food at that time, and populations were able to grow or stabilize over that period of time. And it was an important progression. Move forward sort of like to 5,000 years ago, and ancient civilizations and agrarian empires began to emerge. Mesopotamia, India, China, a range of other sort of ideas. During that particular time, labor was mostly slave labor or serfdom, right? And these were, and agriculture was a principal idea in the rise and sustainability of those empires as well, through taxation, through a range of other systems that we have in government today that came out of that move to agrarian empires. The medieval agricultural societies that we saw emerge in Europe was this next big phase. Feudalism started to rise. Lords of the manor controlled land and sharecropping, and others began to dominate the agricultural landscape in that period of time. Then we saw the rise of early modern sort of period of globalization that started to take place. There was some trade that began between different countries during that period of time. Let's talk what came after that, and that is the Industrial Revolution. For those of you who have studied the Industrial Revolution, a profound period of time and change in societies. A number of things changed. Machines were developed, not just machines for farming and agriculture, but the development of the steam engine during the Industrial Revolution gave way to transportation as well. We saw trains and ships, the ability to ship goods from one location to the other. And that's where trade started to dramatically increase until we moved to the 20th century and the forebears of the tail end for which I was a student. We saw industrial and scientific agriculture. But the question for Thailand and for many countries like Thailand is what does the 21st century hold for agriculture? It's certainly the social implications of how agriculture moved. It's not going to be the same in the next 100 years for Thailand. Thailand's been below replacement birth rate for some time now. You have an aging population of farmers. There's an emerging reliance on migrant workers coming in to fill those gaps. You've got a history of small land holdings, challenges that are going to take place. At the same time, we're seeing a rise in the way that technologies are having a profound impact on food production. And we're going to talk about some of those today. So the question about where we're going now becomes a relevant one when we talk about these ideas. And I'm going to use lots of examples to talk about these from both a political and an economic and a development perspective today. I think we'll leave a discussion about agriculture in Thailand. You know, the periods of Thailand's progression through its agriculture. Of course, you know, for a long time, you know, rice was at the very heart and core of Thai society for a long time. And there were transformations in the 20th century, particularly I believe it was King Chulalongkorn, you know, like who drove some of those, you know, the globalization of some agricultural production during that particular time, the modernization of agriculture during that particular time. But it's been since then entrenched in a lot of politics. The divide between rural or red shirts communities in politics, and the place of agriculture within the military coups that took place, I think 2006, 2014, if I'm not mistaken. These have been ideas that have been entrenched in agriculture in Thailand, not just Thailand, many other countries, including my own country in Australia as well. So let's talk about economic value chain. I'm going to share with you a little bit about what it is and how it's different from supply chains. And again, I apologize if I've mistaken the audience as being more expert than I am. So bear with me and we'll talk about some of these. I worked on a project some years ago now, and this was an ADB funded project. Again, this is between Australia and Indonesia, where we mapped the economic value chain gaps and opportunities in energy storage between Australia bilaterally and Indonesia. And this was part of a broader bilateral cooperation between these two countries in accelerating the development of energy storage technologies. At the time, you know, back when the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership was signed, energy storage was one of those ideas, and there's been many very positive emergences from marine electrification projects to the development of battery manufacturing that's taking place in Indonesia now. We've seen an increased trade in technology transfers in minerals, particularly critical minerals. Australia has a lot of lithium. Indonesia has got a lot of nickel and other elements. So we started to see some increased cooperation in this space. Likewise, I started doing a lot of work in many countries in the area of semiconductors as well. Semiconductors has, for those of you who are not necessarily technologically conversant with what semiconductors are, we sometimes use this term we misappropriate the term a little bit. Semiconductor is just a material that can conduct electricity and not conduct electricity depending on the circumstances, right? The application of current. It's probably more appropriate to call them chips, right? Semiconductors is, you know, like sometimes silicon, gallium nitride. My little charger down there is not silicon anymore. It's gallium based and a range of other ideas. But these have become so ubiquitous within society that they entered into that terrain where semiconductors became an essential part of the politics of national security, the diversification of supply chains, and many countries started to develop capabilities in semiconductors, and that's some of the work that we've been doing in India, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, and even a little bit in Thailand, who have also spent a lot of time in developing some capabilities in this space as well. We started looking at some of the education, mapping the education and skills components throughout what you see on that outer ring there, a traditional supply sort of chain that we see from raw materials and producing the ingot and wafers and designing them and fabricating them and packing them and the product development that goes into them right up to recycling and reusing. Try to better understand what are the types of skills at all levels that are required to develop an ecosystem in this place. Can I also point out, for those of you who would like to zoom in and get more details of these over time, the entire deck will be provided for you to download from wherever AIT can communicate these things to everyone. So you don't need to take some photographs. You can just download the deck and you're welcome to it. We'll give you all of the images and slides that are here today. And then we looked at the ways that those semiconductors are outputted into some different areas. So let's talk about what it is, what an economic value chain is. So particularly how it differs from a supply chain. And we'll look at this from different perspectives: its focus, the scope, the objective of developing it, the perspective and some of the components. So a supply chain typically focuses on the flow of goods and services and information required to produce and deliver a product or a service, from raw materials to the end consumer, kind of like that outer ring that I just showed you in semiconductors. We know we need raw materials and we go all the way around the loop until we get back to recycling them. And this is sort of like a typical supply chain. But an economic value chain focuses on creating and adding value at each stage of the process, emphasizing the activities and stakeholders involved in enhancing the product or a service's worth. So we tend to focus not so much on the supply chain, even though it's kind of included in what we map out, but we work out how we can add value to that, how we can make sure that the supply chains are going to work. Who needs to be involved in making the whole ecosystem work? So a supply chain, typically, it focuses on sort of primarily operational concerns, logistics, inventory, production, processes, distribution, the flow of goods from one place to another. An economic value chain is a bit broader in scope. It encompasses the economic, social, and environmental aspects. It includes upstream and downstream activities that contribute to overall value creation. The objective of a supply chain is to ensure efficiency, cost effectiveness in the movement of goods and services. But an economic value chain aims to understand how value is added and captured by different actors along the chain, including producers, intermediaries, and consumers. Supply chain is often viewed from the perspective of logistics, deals with the physical flows. And an economic value chain is viewed mostly from an economic and development perspective. It highlights opportunities for increasing value, improving livelihoods, and fostering competitiveness. And this will make a bit more sense when we use some examples later on, right? These principles. We're going to talk about some examples. The components of a supply chain are typically, procurement, manufacturing, warehousing, transportation, the kinds of logistics things that we've talked about. But in an economic value chain, we spend a lot of time talking about factors like research and development, innovation activities, market integration, policy frameworks, the way that governments and other agencies get involved in securing that value and ensuring that that value can thrive, skills development, sustainability efforts, the full spectrum of broader ideas. So a supply chain asks typically these key questions: how can the product be delivered efficiently and on time? And how can costs be minimized in production and logistics? Right? If you had a job in supply chain or you're doing a degree in supply chain logistics, these are you're doing one. Okay, so this is like your first year class, right? Okay. I might call on you to come and teach the rest of it, okay? But economic value chain is interested in how value is created, distributed, and shared amongst stakeholders. and what interventions, policy interventions, technology interventions, skills training and development interventions, a range of those other things that can improve the value that is generated. And in this discussion today, the value that we're talking about generating is national value when we talk about human social development or economic development at a national level. Kind of concluding this area, an economic value chain is then the sequence of activities and processes through which a product is created, enhanced, delivered to consumers, focusing on how value is added and distributed at each stage. It encompasses everything from inputs, technologies, production processes, all the supply chain things, but also on sustainability. It involves industry coordination, policy support, R&D, innovation activities, sustainability efforts. And the goal is to maximize the value that's created, the equitable distribution of that creation, and competitiveness across all stakeholders involved. It sounds kind of simple, right? But in reality, many of the earlier discussions on sort of economic and social models of the way that we organize our societies around capitalism and late capitalism complicate this issue quite a lot, as it does in agriculture. So let's take a look at sort of a fundamental model of agriculture in terms of an economic value chain of agriculture. Later on, if we've got time, we map out these kinds of in-depth analyses of economic value chains at a kind of macro level for agriculture just generally as a kind of model. But when we actually look at things in more detail, it's not very useful to talk about agriculture itself because agriculture is so diverse. So we will go in depth into individual crops, animals, processes. We have developed, and I will show you later on, economic value chain analyses of artificial insemination of buffaloes, right? At that level of intricacy. We'll look at the different types of crops. We'll look at cassava and rice and a range of other crops that we go into. In Thailand, we've been producing and doing work on wolfia in aquaculture and specifics of agriculture, type of giant river prawns in Hat Yai, in Songkhla province. So we will be looking in depth at sort of this kind of scale of things. But you can sort of see that agriculture has got both, sort of seed, plant, water, irrigation inputs, and also financial inputs as well, credit and microfinance and a range of other ideas. They are the inputs of agriculture. There is a range of technologies that are in place. Also, there is the business of producing food via agricultural production processes, farming practices and skills and adapting to climate, post-harvest handling and processing, logistics and infrastructure, and environmental and waste management on the outer sort of area there. And on the inside, you'll see here that we also go into a lot of depth in this next slide here. And this is where the real value adding bit comes into it. The actual value gains that we have delivered to society and industry and farmers over the last, particularly the last 100 years, has come from a lot of these value-adding activities. The sort of work that's gone on in crop research and soil research, climate research, flood and drought sort of resilience, energy sources, a range of things that have gone into this place, as well as the kind of education. In my former position in the Faculty of Sciences at the University of Western Australia, it's the #1 agricultural university in Australia, one of the top 20 in the world, and an enormous amount of effort has gone into our Institute of Agriculture there and a range of other things. And the sheer volume of training that's been done in everything from agricultural economics from soil science to molecular biology, plant molecular biology, and a range of other things. And that coupled with other many hundreds of universities that have invested in 100 years in providing talent to the agricultural space. Policy and regulatory support. This is the one area that almost every place I go to, I'm often asked, ADB quite often asks me where we should focus on, right? And I quite often unpopularly suggest to them that that when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to the energy transition, when it comes to all of these things, actually it's not skills, it's not it's certainly not technology or science discoveries or range of these things. The missing link in most of the sort of problems that we solve come in innovations in the policy space. That's where the real shortfall is, certainly in my experiences in most of the places that I'm working in. And I would certainly like to see much more work done in that policy and regulatory support space. It's incidentally the hardest thing to gain traction on. It's the hardest thing to get people to invest into. It's sort of embraced in a kind of lot of political stigma as well. It's seen as too difficult, too temporary. And certainly that is also the history of Thailand and agriculture, is that one political movement will enact a whole lot of sort of subsidies and ideas around farming and agriculture. The next political movement will come along and dismantle much of that, and we go back to some of these cycles over time. And that's why it doesn't seem to get much traction. But in saying that, there are some remarkable success stories of the ways in which policy work within an economic value chain has radically transformed a nation. And an example of that is the uptake of rooftop solar in Australia and now energy storage batteries. Australia leads the world in rooftop solar. It installs more rooftop solar per month in Australia than a country like the Philippines does in 20 years. It is moving at a rapid pace. Some new policy work had been done for a long time to move it to the next stage. Now there's about 12 million. Australia is a small country. We're only 25 million people, 26 million people. And of those 26 million people, we've now got more than half of all Australian residences who have installed rooftop solar, sustainably providing energy to those houses. After that, a battery subsidy came into place. Australia has moved heavily into the storage space now to try and to bring batteries at a grid scale, but also at a domestic storage scale. And Australia is now installing around 1,200 domestic home storage systems per day in Australia, outperforming the number of rooftop solar that's in place. It's creating a whole set of other problems to do with the economic viability and stability of the grid. You know, when 10 million people all of a sudden can produce and store their own energy and they don't really need the grid anymore, that's challenging for new investment coming into the country to do more grid scale stuff, because not a lot of people want to buy that electricity anymore. They're quite often good problems to have from a consumer perspective, but from for those who have to manage the grid, not so good. But an example of the way that policy works to solve big problems. And then, of course, industry support. Now, this is more critically important for agriculture than perhaps many other contexts as well. And this includes things like farmer cooperatives, shared technology, the ways in which small, medium agricultural enterprises can remain competitive amongst the multinational and corporate food producers. Okay? Collectivism, I guess. So let's look at some case studies in agriculture to help frame this a little bit. And I want to talk about a farm in my home state. This is a farm called Ebino Plains. To give you some size there, you can see on the map there, it's about, it's a little bit 10 or 15% bigger than Koh Samui, to give you some size. It's a 27,000 hectare farm. And this is, this also happens to be my family's farm. My grandfather founded this farm in around 1919, so over 100 years ago. And his brothers have the adjoining farms, which adds it up to a total of around 120,000. No, leave it there. It's fine. It's fine. It's not important. It's empty. Around 120,000 hectares. So it's a big farm. The farm is what you would typically see in Australia for a farm this size. There's less than 10 workers on the farm for a farm this size. It's mostly all automated. It produces 22,500 tons of wheat. It's what we call a winter crop farm. Canola and lupins, they have the rotation crops. They're oil grains and lupins, sometimes used for food, but mostly used for stock feed for the sheep that are there. So it produces about 57,000 tons, about $27 million a year in production for less than 10 people. Okay. Very highly productive sort of farm that you would see in Australia, but you certainly wouldn't see that in Thailand. And many of the other sort of Southeast Asian and Asian contexts that I work in, they're much smaller land holdings than that. So, so when you see here that a farm that now goes from having the primary position being a farm manager, so to speak, to having a chief technology officer, that you see combine harvesters that are $5 million each, that are controlled from an iPad, that follow up and down harvesting, putting that into automated silos, parking them and distributing it without human intervention at all, right? What happens in those situations is a number of things, but the first thing that might be obvious to all of us is there is no longer an advantage of labor, of the cheap cost of labor. In fact, it's the opposite, because size plus technology is surpassing that of the accessibility to cheap labor and smaller farm sizes. So other people's crops aren't as competitive anymore. And this poses a challenge. Last maybe May, couple of months ago, late May, early June, I was in Melbourne, in Victoria, working with the University of Melbourne. And the University of Melbourne has got a farm about 3 hours away. It's called Dookie Farm, a great facility where they do agricultural research, and they do a range of other things. And this was one of the research areas that I went to. This is interesting because it's not at a big, this is a small scale dairy farm. This would be smaller than the typical dairy farm in Australia, for instance. It's only around 350 cattle, right? And I know that sounds like a lot in the context of Thailand, but in the context of Australian dairy, it's actually a relatively small farm. Considering that there are several farms in cattle that have got maybe 20,000 head of cow, right? So this dairy facility is operated by a big series of robots made by a Dutch company, and almost every element, it has one person running the farm, one person who runs the farm. And you can see here that a dashboard is up on the wall, this computer screen that you can see here. And this will give you, every cow has got an AI, a smart collar around its neck, and it produces health report. It uses sort of behavioral cognitive techniques for ensuring that cattle do the right thing. They come into the automatic milking parlor to be milked when they're allowed to, not when they're not allowed to. In fact, if they queue in too early, the gate that will let them in looks at its collar, says, "You're not ready for milking yet. Go back out and feed some more." So it will switch the gate from going this way to going that way and turn it back out again. And this is the kind of sort of thing that you can see here, that, you know, like you're talking about 4,000 liters of milk, going from having a crew to do 2 milking cycles a day to be able to do 3 milking cycles a day because it's automated, and increase production by 30% over what manual labor would be able to do at a cost competitive rate as well. I also saw a lot of this. This was very interesting as well in Australia. This was this is an example of a horticultural example where technology is used, and these are even smaller scale. This requires about only about 500 square meters of farming, something that is very achievable in Thailand, for instance, where you have much bigger land sizes than this. And these are a series of agricultural automations. These are surprisingly advanced now. I was surprised at how efficient these are, how common they are in many places, not just in this context, but we see them in orchards where fruit is picked by robots, that farms are built. What's a process that's called a spalliad. Spalliad is, rather than you have a tree that's got a canopy that's round like that, it's vertically sort of hollowed out east and west, so it can have a robot go between and pick apples from an espalier apple tree, grape tree, anything those kinds of ideas here. So you start to see these ideas. Now, if we take this model a little bit now and look at how this might play out. I know that this is not zoomed very well, but let's just look at the idea. This is sort of a project that we're doing in Thailand at the moment, and it alludes to a pathway for competitiveness at a small scale through strategic investments based on the way that we understand economic value chains and the way to add value at these stages. So based on some of the work that we've done. So if we were to invest, say, $50,000 in one of these facilities at a college in Thailand, right? Providing the infrastructure, the training, the development, et cetera, we could build one of these advanced facilities there. With that, the college could frame some of their teaching and learning around that to teach about advanced hydroponics, IoT sensors, climate controlling environments, agri-robotics, agronomy, and agribusiness. And it could also be a place for those students to practically learn, because these are commercial facilities. They will and should be run like a business. So it can model to students and demonstrate to students how a facility like this can work. So the students would do their work experience in this facility and learn about production and maintenance, IoT servicing, harvesting, packaging, all the kinds of things that agricultural businesses have to do. But the facility can also be used for extensions work, like this place, extension work, where it can be used as a place for upskilling and reskilling farmers who want to learn about how to move to the next step from some of their traditional kind of grow houses up to something that's a little bit automated. Some of them will be dealing with the challenges of climate change and a growing awareness that they have to work on technology ways to manage their climate through HVAC systems and others. So those courses can be offered. But the one that interests me the most is, how do you move to the next step by saying, well, there's a lot of people in the city who've got a lot of money, and this is a project that the Australian government undertook about 9 years ago now, called the Food Agility CRC, Cooperative Research Centre. And the idea was to take technology people, data people, and put them into agriculture to solve agricultural problems. Partly for deurbanization, for bringing investments, rural and regional development, for bringing investors back into agriculture with more of a technology mindset. So technology investments getting involved in food production and those kinds of things. And the outcomes of that have been phenomenal, from oysters to sheep work to improving the quality of meat and wool to these horticultural ideas. Even a project that's using robots to de-handle bananas. And I know this sounds strange, but as part of an ADB project, I visited a banana de-handling plant in the Philippines. They peel by hand 250,000 bananas a day and chop them up by hand with knives into slices to be dried for banana chips, right? This kind of idea. 250,000 bananas a day, hundreds of workers standing like this, side by side, doing these kinds of things. And that works in the Philippines. That works in the Philippines now. But when countries around the world start using robots that are increasingly cheap to be able to do that, then there are some serious implications to competitiveness, to employment, and a range of other areas that are involved in this. So, so the work with agropreneurs and investors, investor workshops about learning about these, and the development of cooperatives. So what you start to see when you do this, let's say we focus on a particular variety of cherry tomatoes called the Sun Sugar cherry tomatoes. They've got a little bit of a thicker skin than normal cherry tomatoes, so they export very well, right? But if you have one 500 meter square facility, you're not producing enough to be able to meet an export quota. You need to kind of get up to somewhere around, you know, the 5 ton, 10 ton per month kind of per shipment level to be able to do that. But by investing and in cooperative development and other innovative structures around making those kinds of work and attracting investors, you can multiply those facilities in different locations, work together, pool knowledge and learning, et cetera, multiply them. And all of a sudden you are exponentially raising the income of not big corporate kind of things, but small scale farmers, people with an acre or 2 acres, or what do you call it here? You call it rye, right? Which is, I'm not sure of I can't do all the calculations in my head, but small land holdings like 3, 4, 5 rye or something like this, you can do it. Okay, and the volumes exponentially increase. So this is an example. Those 3 examples are kinds of examples about at the large corporate sort of scale, or at the like dairy farm that robotizes, or these kinds of areas, which is a modest investment, $50,000 in a grow house of this size, which can enable you to access higher value markets. Because the price that, you know, like we currently see people selling their produce for at local markets is very, very low prices, but their quantities, their organization is not enough that they can do that. And we think that these are some of the good examples that we can do to fix some of the challenges that Thailand and many other countries face. So I'd like to take a look now at a sort of an aligned idea, and that is some of the work that we do around not economic value chain analysis, but we call it economic social value chain analysis of institutions themselves. And it might just help you to understand how we kind of make a project come together when we're looking at this. So a university or a college has got some economic elements to it, but it's not, nor should it be, a business. These are places of knowledge production, of learning, of curiosity, inquisitive-based research, and a range of other things. TVET College is a little bit different because it is an enterprise that produces skilled labor for industries. typically around the world. That's the reason why governments invest in supporting those fees. But it's also a social institution that transforms individuals and communities and societies as well. So we rightly should look at this a little bit differently. So whilst its economic value chain is centered on job creation, industry support, workforce development, these kinds of ideas, its social value chain extends into areas of personal growth and civic engagement, personal empowerment, social cohesion, entrepreneurship development, a range of other ideas as well. And I'm going to take you through how we sometimes look at these ideas in the context. Universities are a little bit different, and we also have a different model that I work on in that sort of space. But we kind of looked at, what are the ingredients that make up a TVET college particularly? 7 more minutes, okay. And we're able to look at these 5 broad categories and 82 elements that are in them. And then we started to just map them out in some details for the colleges that we work with, the inputs, the core education and training processes that we go through, supporting processes that they're there. You can see familiar ideas to those who are in education. Some of the outputs that we expect from the processes of teaching and learning, and the long-term value and continuous improvement that we deliver to some of the stakeholders. So we ask the colleges themselves to play a role in reflecting on their colleges and the broader EVC of their college, and assess their capabilities throughout each of those entities. It also helps them to be a part of identifying the gaps and the opportunities, the ways that we can accelerate community outcomes, advance some of those opportunities. And then we have some tools that we use to be able to map them out. Those maps are useful, not just the maps, but as Joe has joined us on many trips into rural parts of Thailand, we spend several visits at many of these colleges. We've just been back here, I think 2 weeks ago. We visited some other colleges in Chiang Mai and Mahazadakam and some other places as well for this particular project. We spent some time learning everything about buffaloes and big, beautiful buffaloes and beauty contests for buffaloes, a range of other things. But we, more importantly than that, we're able to use the feedback and our work to try and identify where the gaps are, where the problems are with these institutions. Through an analysis of these sort of economic and social value chain elements, we're able to just try and create these maps where we can identify the areas that we need to invest in, or more importantly, the areas in which Thailand needs to start investing in to ensure that these colleges are fit for purpose for the next phase of what agriculture is going to look like in Thailand. You can see that in the areas of technology here, there's universal areas in here. We see that the adoption of technologies in some of the colleges is universally at the sort of fair, poor, none sort of phase of their development. Okay. We had a whole lot of observed challenges that we get from these processes that we go to. But more importantly, what we do then is, I'll move on quickly, is we develop a range of interventions that are designed for fixing some of those problems up. The colleges having access to data, it really surprised me when we go to these colleges. At the forefront of most agricultural producers, I have my own farm, a very small farm in the southwest of Australia. It's 42 hectares. But instinctively, data is the very first thing that almost every farmer in Australia looks at. My grandfather kept temperature, rainfall, and other meteorological records since 1920, handwritten in a ledger every single day, without one day being missed for anything. It was at the forefront of everything that they had done. one of the polls that we took at the colleges is we asked each of the colleges to tell us if they could tell us some very basic information about agriculture in their community, in the areas, the current price for this commodity or that commodity, how the temperature has changed over the last 30 years or 40 years, what is rainfall like now compared to then, da 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 da. Universally, none of them could answer any of those questions. That's there. None of them. And so there are many challenges that confront this sort of landscape. So internet connectivity and a data dashboard, an app. So every student, every teacher, every staff member, it's in front of them, like the milking dashboard that we saw there, that an evidence-based approach to decision-making becomes a part of their practice, so on. A range of other sort of services that we go to. And you can see on these right-hand side here, we go about the business of coming up with solutions. And those solutions are based on our analysis of the different components that make up the ways in which we can add value to different areas. You get the idea. I think we're going to just move through these again. For those of you who want to go through some of this in some details, I'm going to leave the deck with Joe and the team there, and you'll be able to look at it in some detail. So that's an overview of one of the ways in which ADB works. Certainly, there are many more elements to the way that we approach a project. They're quite complicated, but my inputs into many of the projects that we work is in this area of economic value chain analysis, mapping, thinking, critiquing, trying to put it into some perspective from the bigger, political and socioeconomic perspective of the countries in which we work, taking a look at history and the way that history drives some of these ideas, and the issue of how complicated they are. And I would be happy to answer any questions that you've got from now. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Sean. So so now we welcome for Q&A. We are already looking at the big pictures, going to cascade it into the micro level to products and crops and livestock. So any questions, please feel free to. Yes, Dr. Shippen.
Is it working? Yeah, thank you, Sean. Well, we have credible developments. Well, of course, we know about what's happening in industries, all this robotization, and it's a stunning development is occurring in agriculture, as we see. So your economic value chains are doing great. But we have a foreboding of something happening with social value chains, because what all those people, as you said correctly, involved in agriculture, what they're going to do in future. On the other front, in service industry, we have AI fighting with human beings. So it's pretty depressing sometimes. So how you see that?
It's a great question. I'm a bit more optimistic than depressed about it. I think we are certainly going to. We've got a lot that we have to deal with. I have some hypotheses. The short answer to how we're going to deal with it is I don't know, right? Do we need to deal with it? We certainly do. I think it will go a number of ways. I think that with many of these movements around AI and social media, and sometimes the pendulum swings a little bit too far, and it needs to correct itself over time. I think technology is has the advancement of, let's say, robots, sensors, a range of other things. When they first came onto the market, their price was really high, right? IoT sensors for agriculture now, dirt cheap. To set up one of these systems now is relatively inexpensive, and it's available for most farmers. In fact, it's a very investable idea to finance some of these small scale areas. I don't think that small scale farmers are going to become obsolete. I think that the next generation of farmers will need to be prepared to transition to a different way of doing things. I think that we need to invest in organizing small scale community farmers. I actually think that what we'll see is a resurgence of agriculture, but a much bigger localization of it. I think that we'll see less shipping of agricultural products. I think we'll see, I think that we will see a sort of broader localization of that. We see movements in Japan, for instance, that have taken off quite a lot, and we're seeing them in Australia as well. Community-run gardens that are localized around communities that are focused on retired people growing fresh produce and selling these to workers who come home again. I think that we will, like we've seen an online revolution, I think we'll see a resurgence in quality, locally produced food. And I also think that we will see deurbanization of big cities. There's a number of reasons for that. I think AI, if you take, we work on a project in the Philippines. The biggest employer in the Philippines is the IT BPO sector, the business process outsourcing, call centers, right? Millions of people are employed. It accounts, that industry alone accounts for 50% of the commercial infrastructure in every city in the Philippines. 50% for one industry. That is on a decline to nowhere. For as much as the evangelists of that industry think that they'll be able to transition to knowledge process outsourcing, the evidence that's early in is suggesting that that's not possible. So I think that we will see a lot of those people moving back into their provinces, into their rural communities, putting their skills and their, transferring their skills from other areas into small scale, smart, precision agricultural production. Not just that, but also post-harvest processing in novel ways, for which Thailand is already very good at. I'm confident that we can, that we will fix this this challenge up, but I think it will go in the favor of those who can produce food rather than against them.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Nhung from School of Management. I study doctoral degree on logistics and supply chain management. But 10 years ago, I studied Harvard Kennedy School on public policy, that the definition of value chain, we take a lot of examples and study. So from your presentation, I feel very close to my career and my understanding. And I have 3 questions. If possible, I will. First one, value chain analysis. We relate to many stakeholders inside and outside a country. For example, for agriculture, we have to import fertilizer outside, or we export, and then we evaluate the benefit that exporter or importer to, or the price for final rice or selling rice overseas. By this way, we know that how many percent or how many profits that farmer or middleman or kind of exporter to have. So in this case, if the value chain relate to outstanding or external factors or stakeholder, how can we analyze? That's the first question. Second, for agriculture only or for national development strategies, that means we need to combine many sectors. Like, for example, one country.
One question at a time.
Okay.
Because I think my brain's much older than yours.
So my first question, if our supply chain or value chain relate to external stakeholder overseas, so how can we evaluate?
Look, I don't know, it would be fun. I think that we can evaluate the external, listen, almost every industry, the globalization of most industries is well and truly advanced now. It doesn't matter what it is. Most industries rely on inputs from other countries to be able to do their work. If you take our work in semiconductors or battery systems or energy storage systems, all of these rely on a very complex network of. The reason why we analyze these things is to better understand the risks of reliance on those external stakeholders. In fact, the reason why many nations are doing this work on semiconductor autonomy at the moment is for that. If you've been reading the press lately, you'll see that car production in Indonesia has stalled. Factories have gone to a standstill. The reason why they've gone to a standstill is they can't get chips for their cars anymore, right? They don't have this. There are supply chain problems and gaps that they haven't foreseen, right? And so how do we do it? We analyze it. We analyze those external stakeholders to understand. Agriculture is one of those. There are some fertilizers, for instance, for which there is only one supplier in the whole world, right? China, in those areas. And, many of these, there are many vulnerabilities in global supply chains of critical minerals and critical elements and critical inputs. So understanding these, one of the reasons why we do this work is to try and communicate to governments and others particularly. ADB is a sovereign lender, right? It lends to governments. It's a bank, but a bank to 30-odd customers, right? And so it does do a lot of work in trying to flag to stakeholders some of the vulnerabilities in those economic value chains. If you look at my area, the area that human social development sector at ADB does a lot of work on, is it's in the area of skills development. The Philippines wants to advance semiconductors as well, as do many other countries. They simply don't have, they have the ability to train 10 people a year, right? Their current system on advanced packaging of semiconductors, 10 people a year. Yet their whole ecosystem is so heavily dependent on those. Those 10 people go overseas, can't pay them enough to stay, right? They have this brain training that goes on. In terms of those external stakeholders, I guess what my question is that's what we do. We analyze them. We work out where they are and how do they shore up those supply chains? What do they do to remedy that? Right? Because analysis of economic value chains is for the purposes of interventions, remedies, solutions, fixing things up. Right?
Second question. For national development strategies, we understand that for national level, that means we have to combine many industries together. For example, one nation, we have manufacturing, services, and agriculture. And in agriculture, we have a lot of smaller classification like harvesting, forestry, poultry, or anything. So my question is, with a big and large scale strategy like that, how can we combine and we evaluate the metric or the weight of how many contribution or based on which kind of criteria that we can create one strategy for a national level for agriculture, or ADB or other organization now they will focus in deeper like poultry or dairy industry or something?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was just trying to see if I could pull up a deck for you. I'll find it a little bit later. One of the other things that we do is we look at the interconnections between different value chains, right? Which is in response to your question, because actually an economic value chain doesn't exist in isolation, right? It's connected to all kinds of other economic value chains as well to understand to understand the inputs. For anything, we will need to try and understand the connections between that. Semiconductors is another one of those. It's connected to understanding medical devices or autonomous vehicles or electric vehicles or agricultural sensors or a range of other things. So I think the work that different agencies and different stakeholders should be doing in economic value chain analysis is to try and understand those interconnections, understand the vulnerabilities in each of those. And I don't think it's just the vulnerabilities or risks. I think the work that we do also enlightens us to the possibilities, the opportunities, the ways in which we can restructure some of our investments to capitalize on some of those opportunities, to fill gaps in other areas. We have a problem, of course, in Thailand, an aging population. And this is, farmers are getting a bit older. But the challenge is, how do you bring people back to agriculture? In Australia, for instance, there's 3 degrees in Australia. If you look at the landscape of undergraduate education, there are 3 degrees that have 100% employment. In other words, you are statistically guaranteed to get a very good job within 6 months or 3 months of graduation with one of these 3 degrees. A degree in mathematics, a degree in physics, and a degree in agriculture. They're the 3D. Only half of those who graduate with an agriculture degree actually go into agriculture. They're in demand from other sectors, banking, finance, all sorts of other areas as well. So I think the idea of that you talk about that intertwining of value chains as well, that interplay, it's important work to be done. There are some governments who do a lot of work on this, who do play through these scenarios in great detail. But there are other governments that we visit regularly who don't understand what an economic value chain even is, right?
I just curious about how many steps in general, if we do one national strategy for ministry level or for, one location or one district, is it different, right? Because we need to get a lot of stakeholder, many level, and work for association, farmer association, or company or something. So on average, and they found you or you found them. If we are customer, like they found IDB or they they find you and they said, oh, my country needs a strategy like that. We need to build a master plan or something. They find you or you will approach the country.
It's a good question. I think that different governments approach this in different ways. I think the next step from economic value chain analysis is an idea which many countries use, and that is the development of industry transformation maps, right? Those industry transformation maps are the pathway to resolving of the problems, right? So you might have an industry transformation map for agriculture, and that might be nationally based or geographically based or a combination of all those other ideas. Certainly in a country like Thailand, you have your Koppen, your agricultural zones vary quite a lot. So the agriculture in the far north in Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai districts is very different from, say, Ratchaburi, right? Which is very different from Hat Yai and the Songkhla region in the far south. So, like the solutions need to be moderated, for those kinds of ideas. But I think those transformation maps at a national level, can play a role in that. But problems are local, right? Agricultural problems are local. It's one of the reasons why we spend a lot of time in each district, in each place. And it's sometimes, it's a wonderful career, right? But it's not, we sleep in college dormitories and, our lives are a little bit interesting, particularly when we're in really, really developing contexts, say in Odisha, in India, or someplace where there are just not even the availability of hotels. It can be quite challenging. But we're there for that reason, because problems are local and solutions have to be local as well. You'll get, let's say Odisha, for instance, if you talk about this issue of where we focus things, you've got this district on the coast that in 30 years, right, they have 25% more rainfall than they did 30 years ago, right? And then you go up inland a little bit, up to the higher regions in Odisha, those areas there, right, where it's hotter. They have 18% less rainfall than they had 30 years ago. Their agricultural practices remain the same there and there as they have for 50 years, right? These challenges become really complicated. So, I think my answer to your question is, you really have to spend some time understanding the local situation for all of these ideas to be able to understand. My background, my academic background is the social anthropology of science and technology in developing countries. My research was in a small village on the outskirts of the Central Kalahari Desert in Botswana in Africa, where I lived, right? So part of me is still a sort of social ethnographer of science and technology. So being in the thick and in the midst of those communities and understanding the nuanced nature of the problems, some of the cultural elements to those problems is really important. I think that there should be a new wave of social, economic, political anthropologists that are trained, maybe at AIT, who can work throughout Asia, contributing to these problems. Because that's the missing link for a lot of our work to do. We think that these are technology problems or other problems. They're not. Most of our work are not these kinds of, we have almost every single technology today that we need to solve issues of food sustainability, climate change, all of these. Technology is not our problem. It's the kind of things that you're talking about. So you will be the graduate who will leading that after you've done finish your PhD and whatever you move on to. I think the answer to my question is this is your problem to fix, not mine. I'm too old now. Right.
If possible, the last question, I talk about the practical issue. For example, now we have CPTPP, we have US trade taxation conflict around the world. So some country, they have very competitive advantages on some kind of industry. Like Vietnam, we have garment and textile. They're very competitive, but now they cannot export to US and they have redundant or they have very cheap labor or something. And if I apply value chain analysis or supply chain analysis to analyze some kind of smaller industry.
Change tomorrow.
But I mean, how I can make use of the knowledge from your speak or IDB resources to build a strategy for a real case in Vietnam. For example, we cannot export to US, but now we can explore smaller market like Australia or even Thailand or Singapore or something. I mean, in practical issue, how can I start?
Yeah. Okay, so I do a lot of work in textiles and garments as well. I was doing a case study at a factory in Cimahi in Indonesia. It's a factory that produces textiles for Target and Victoria's Secrets in the US and H&M in Europe, right? They're textiles manufacturers in Cimahi. Those textiles get sent to Bangladesh and turned into garments, right? And then they get exported, some to Europe and some to the US that way. And wow, the problems are plentiful, right? So the companies in the US, the company recently sent me the letters that they received from Target and VS, right? Asking them, Indonesia, to reduce their prices to pay the tariffs that Trump had imposed on them, right? And to find ways of improving their efficiencies, reducing their workforce, literally saying reduce your workforce, right? Your input, so you can reduce your prices so we don't have to pass on the costs of those tariffs to the consumers in the United States, right? This is the reality on the ground of what we're seeing. A tariff is an import tax. Some people don't like to call it this. And the mistruths and nonsense that is in the political rhetoric in the United States at the moment about, all of these companies sending bucket loads of cash to the United States. They're not, right? Of course, whoever imports those products pays the tax on it. They pay the import tax, called a tariff, and they can then determine how they're going to distribute the costs of bearing that, right? It will be a mix of things. If you take shoes, for instance, the markup on a pair of shoes when it lands in the United States is about 5 or 6%, right? That's the sort of stuff. You're not going to pass on, you're not going to absorb like a 24% tariff or a 25% tariff from 21% tariff from Indonesia. And I don't know what you're up to now in Vietnam, 46% or something stupid, right? And it's just not going to be possible. So you've got to try and manage that by either penalizing the manufacturer, bullying the manufacturer, right? Or doing I think that what we're starting to see is I have a solution to these problems that I probably can't. I think I have a solution to some of those problems, but it's gonna take another 3 years before we can execute that solution probably, and that's just don't elect him back in again. But in the meantime, what we're starting to see is a decoupling of traditional allies in trade. Exactly what you're looking for, a movement away from those markets. It's always been a challenge, of course, to be overexposed to any one particular market is always a risk. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this field, but certainly I know that Australia, every week I read on the news something related to that. Japan and India just signed a $67 billion semiconductor agreement last week. Now, these kinds of pledges are sometimes more aspirational than they are real. So we'll see over time, but they certainly do signal to the US and to others that empires rise and fall in history. And just as you rise, you can fall as well. So I think that the world can adapt to these tariffs in other ways. There are other places. The problem is that the United States has become such a consumer, right? Such a big market and a big economic market. But just as that's happening, don't forget that other markets are rising equally as fast as well. So there are options in this place. These are crazy times. What can I say?
Thank you. Yes. So we have 2 more questions at the back.
Yes, Dr. Sean, hello, and thank you for the seminar. I have maybe one point I was curious about, and another one is a question. First is I was really taken by that number, 27 million Australian dollars, if I read it correctly, and 10 people. I mean, that's close to the whole market capitalization of some few companies back in India, if only that was a startup.
You mean the farm?
Yes.
Oh yeah, and this is by no means a big farm in Western Australia. Yeah. There's a neighboring farm that's 26,000 square kilometers. One farm. Yeah. Please go on.
Yep. So you said you want to move people back into agriculture. I mean, back in India, we want to move people out.
Yeah.
And the thing that's sort of a question is, I was curious about how does one go about thinking on this economic value chain analysis for different commodities? For example, for different commodities or products. If I start thinking about, let's say, the energy business, you take crude oil from somewhere, you refine it somewhere, and then sell it somewhere. But that's a sort of a high frequency product, which goes, everything goes 24 hours by 7.
Yeah.
But something like an agricultural crop, it has maybe a bi-yearly output, or per year it might
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah,
3 or 4 times. So how does one go about thinking differently for
Yep.
between commodities?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, we do work in a number of other areas as well, and we're not talking some agricultural are not crops that are milk, for instance, is 3 times a day production, right? The example that I had given you then, it's like 5-6 tons per day being produced and then shipped off to different suppliers, one for making cheese, one for data, and so on and so on and so on. Listen, I think 2 parts of my response. Just the idea that you want to think about developing sort of doing economic value chain analysis for any commodity or any industry or any sector, most of the information that we have to outsource is publicly available, but it takes time, right? It takes time to invest some time into understanding it. There's a lot of value in doing it, in being able to get stuff. A lot of what we do in saying that is we do the analysis, and what we inevitably end up finding is saying to governments, you've got critical gaps in your data, right? That an adjustment to your systems can make sure that you provide that data so others have got access to it to be able to do this kind of work. So the data is the first problem. But in terms of high throughput business ideas, I think the process is exactly the same, right? You analyze it on the basis of those kinds of ideas, on the basis with adjustments in place for, for the repetition of whichever access it is that you need access to. For instance, the dairy example, those cheese manufacturers, they need access to that milk, not twice a year, they need it every day, right? So that the frequency of those access increases to that. The cherry tomato production, I mean, they're harvesting every day. They're harvesting every day. So they've got to manage the frequency of every day. They've got to manage from that into cold storage, right? And they've got to manage that into distribution centers and so on and so on. So I don't think that agriculture and many other commodities, we've done it for textiles, for shoes, for all kinds of other things. I think the frequency is the same. I think there are many models out there in the literature that you can learn about. We use a circular model quite often with different layers of rings to determine different sort of elements of the value adding process. You can choose a model and then just do the work, right? It's just about accessing the data, working out. It's kind of like reverse engineering. You've got a camera and you're going to take it apart to work out what all the elements of that camera are and where they come from. Where does the glass come from? Where does this chip come from? Where does the cable, where does the copper come from? Where's the plastic shell come from? Just reverse engineer your context until you work it out.
Thank you.
One question from my curiosity. So Sean mentioned about his grandfather is actually recording data whether, since the beginning, maybe 60, 70 years ago. And we've seen that we are having that challenges for our cultures in Asia to really have another mindset. So how we are to deal with this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the way to deal with this is kind of these enculturations and these transformations can quite often come in a generational sense through 2 mechanisms. One through the education system, by being able to understand you'll see in the deck that one of the propositions that we made is that there is a giant screen in every classroom in the foyer to every college that's got all of the data feeds inside on a dashboard. So every student walks in, every class, everything. The first thing that they see is the data right from there. Weather data, agricultural prices, output, blah, 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 whatever the sort of processes there are. So that's the first one. And I think the second one is when industries transform, that when they go into the workplace, they see that this new generation of farmers will mainstream that or will normalize that data. I've seen it in Australian farms now. Of course, it was actually it was 105 years ago that my grandfather started recording that data, right? A long, long time ago that data has been recorded. Of course, now that's automated and it's on an app and you see it all the time, right? That's in there. So I think that through those mechanisms, that's the way that will change.
From the online audience, Dr. Babu said, and actually this and we also have a concluding question because it's about AIT. So what actually the role of AIT can play in doing this, having connection with the World Bank and funding agencies and the regions, organizations that they can also, what actually you can see the role of AIT. That's the last question. And also,
yeah, it's a great question. I would, I think that there is so much work to be done in this space, right? That I come from a background in higher education as well. I think that I think first of all that if there is the availability, you're doing a PhD in this area, right? All those kinds of things. So I think highlighting the need for these kinds of postgraduate studies, we certainly need a pipeline of experts who are going to be in the field, right? But thinking carefully about, it's not rocket science, right, to work this out. A lot of people, a lot of economists do this work. A lot of people with my kind of background do this work as well, who come from more of a social anthropology of technology in developing countries kind of work. I'm not an economist. But I think that different types of people, but within this field, we have gaps as well. So, the social anthropology of this kind of stuff, because these are very situational ideas. So through curriculum, modifications or courses or other kind of teaching and learning practices to bring some of this into your broader curriculum through events like this, you're socializing these ideas through these kinds of events. I think that there are structural things by promoting postgraduate topics in these areas for future PhD students. A lot of PhD students know they want to do a PhD. They're not sure what they want to do yet. They need a little bit of guidance. There are other structural things, having clusters of people like yourself within the postgraduate circles. Our universities, we work on a lot of thematic ideas through institutes and centers. So we might have an institute for economic value chain analysis in priority industry clusters or sectors. These kinds of structural ideas within universities are things worth considering. By doing what you've done, Joe, and participate in some of these missions that we've got to help bring your set of knowledge and expertise from the center into there, I think that we would welcome more of that idea. Getting even your PhD students involved who are doing this kind of work. I'll be getting her details after we finish and wondering when we can steal her after when you graduate. Okay, hurry up, yeah, okay.
hurry up.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Because I think there's some of the things that we can do,
Yes.
and having discussions about some of these ideas is a good first step.
Right.
Okay.
So last question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sean. I think the presentation was really eye-opening, and we can see how we can really use and apply these kind of tools for our analysis, whether it is sectoral, national strategy, or even a smaller scale. My question is, because we are from South and Southeast Asia, and you have given some example from Australia, which are really fascinating and maybe not comparable at all with us, because we here is still like all of these countries in South and Southeast Asia, we have 60 to 80 or even 85% farmers are still called marginalized farmers with a very small land holding. like 1 to 2 hectares of land. And these farmers are always having issues. They are never rich, never been able to meet their main requirements even, you know. So my question will be straightforward to it. Says, what's the need for these people doing a, you know, economic value chain analysis, specifically in the agricultural sector? And how can we really solve the issues of these farmers, or how they can be actually, their problem can be addressed?
It's a really important question. You're entirely right. In many of the places that we work in, those subsistence farmers are amongst the most marginalized, but they play an increasingly important role. There will be, you know, if you take issues in Bangladesh, India, other places at the moment, those governments are well aware of the risks, the civil risks of agriculture failing in those countries, or agricultural workers arriving at the place where they're no longer sustainable, right, to keep going, or they get old and their kids just don't want to farm anymore. It's too hard, too difficult, it's too hot, too many risks. You know, the availability of finance and other inputs just aren't there anymore. What happens when it all fails? You know, as I've traveled around the world looking at many of these small scale farmers, the one thing that has struck me is the scale of the low hanging fruit problems that can easily be solved, right? The way from low productivity to financially sustainable to thriving is not a very long arc. It can sometimes be as simple as leveling out your paddy, so you increase your production by 30 or 40%, right? Because you've got water aggregating in the wrong places, not evenly, right? It's a kind of technology that's like easy to get, like a laser leveler. It's not something that an individual farmer needs to purchase. It just needs to be one available in the community, and don't need it very often, right? It's mostly around organization. And here's why this project in Thailand is the project that I'm most intimately connected to, this agricultural sort of project in Thailand, is because I think when you invest properly in these community-based agricultural colleges that become the centerpiece of those farming communities, that knows them really intimately, that they will be a powerful force for change in those communities for small-scale farmers, through shared technology, through upskilling, through reskilling, through other programs, and I'm confident that you can create new. I mean, I'm open to anybody. I'm going to work for another 10 years and then I'm going to become a farmer full time, right? I know exactly what I'm doing, where I'm going to do it, those kinds of things. I'm growing black truffles in a property in the southwest of Australia, right? And it's a great life for a lot of people, and a lot of rural people love it. And if a lot of city people went there, they'd love it as well. So I think that sometimes the path to improvement is not as steep as we think it is. I think it's actually, it's much easier than we think. Correct.
Thank you. So maybe Dr. Zakir, I would like to request you to give a word of thanks and also a closing remark on behalf of us.
Thank you. Thank you, Achan Bhorawe. Thank you, everyone. Definitely, we like to convey our sincere gratitude to our speaker today, Dr. Sean. We are delighted to have you with us, and I think there is a lot of key learnings from this presentation. And we have our own takeaways. Everybody has their own takeaways, and definitely we are going to use it. With that, I think this is first time we are meeting, Dr. Sean. officially and also in this way. So we'll be looking forward to meet with you again and again, definitely in many different ways, and probably in some of these things that you have mentioned, how AIT as an academic institute can actually play the role, especially like when we are working in the academia, training and capacity building and consultancy projects and the research. I think these inputs and these information are really, really useful, and we are definitely looking forward, and we will be looking forward to that. So thank you very, very much for the wonderful presentation. With that, I'd like to thank to all of our participants presenting and joining here in person, and also the participants who have joined online. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this was interesting and useful for all of you. And finally, of course, I like to convey our gratitude to the moderator and also the host for today's session, Mr. Voravet Chonlasin, and his entire team at AIT Extension. Thank you very much, Achan Voravet and the AIT Extension and the AIT Extension colleagues for making this happen. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful good afternoon to everyone.